clubhouse man was, but they'd been working out. It was a hot day. Mize had gone out the night before with Rigney. They'd gone out having some drinks. And Johnny did usually drink beer, but this night he was having whiskey, according to Rigney. And Rigney's like, Johnny's like, don't tell the guys, you know, I don't like people to know that I like to drink liquor. Mm-hmm. He was shy about it. Next morning, or next day at the workout, he's sweating like a pig. He used to wear this rubber suit to work out, and his Mize had a weight problem. So he'd wear these rubber suits to work out and lose weight. And it's drenched, and he comes out of and he's going to go to the shower, and Rigney says, I bet you that's some of that liquor that you're sweating out there, Johnny. And he says, shh, I told you not to say nothing about that. He goes to take a shower. While he's in the shower, Rigney and a couple of the others put some lighter fluid around where he was, and they light it on fire. So then Johnny comes out, they put the match there and say, look at that, Johnny, that's that liquor you were sweating out. And he's like, I didn't know it could do that. You know, they pulled a fast. He's usually a pretty sharp guy, but it was like, what, you can really do that? They thought he was burning liquor from his pores. Anyway, I didn't know if we were getting started yet. This is our group. Come on, where's the rest of Baltimore? This is the best group in Baltimore. Now, who's Baltimore fans here? Who's
almost embarrassing?
That's right. And I heard you mention Yankees. But do you live here?
So I live in the area. I live about 20 to 25 minutes from here.
So you're from New York originally?
From New York originally.
Okay, because I was going to say, how can you live? This seems to be one of the most rabid, this area, I've known Baltimore fans all my life. And for some reason, we had a lot of people from Baltimore when I was a kid in Florida growing up and learning about baseball. And they were big, and of course the Orioles were great. So a lot of people became fans of the Orioles, I think, in those years because they were great, even if they didn't live in Baltimore. I knew some of those too. But we're here to talk about Johnny Mize. And of course, he never played for Baltimore. He played in Baltimore. We were talking about that when he was in the International League with Rochester. He played quite a few games in Baltimore and did very well. He hit some home runs out of the park, which you would know more about the history. I don't know what the name of the stadium was. It wasn't Memorial yet, but he hit some balls that left the premises. And he abused a lot of teams in the International League, and he was a known quantity well before he made it to the major leagues, which is interesting. Back when Johnny started, the Cardinals, in the Cardinal chain, they were known as the chain gang, because it was like being in a prison. You were in a vast system of minor league teams with the Cardinals, and basically movement was measured sideways. It was hard to move up. But Branch Rickey, that was one of his great inventions, and Johnny got caught up in that. But let's start a little bit and with this little primer. We'll talk about Johnny the young man. And here he is. He's probably 15 or 16 in this picture. And this is the home I was talking about. This is about 20-something years ago. There was a typo in this historical marker, by the way. And I write about that in the book. Demarest, Georgia, small town, 700 or so people when he was born. And that ballooned a little bit with the college because there's Piedmont University there now. But Piedmont College was there at the time. It was the only game in town, right? So there weren't enough kids to play like a pickup baseball game. One reason he took up tennis as a kid. He took up tennis because it was easy to find another kid to play tennis with. It was hard to find 8 other kids to have one team, let alone. So he learned to play tennis before he learned to play baseball. One of the things he did with the local college team is they would give the kids broken bats, because him and some of the other kids would hang out, and the coach would let the kids keep the broken bats. He would take these bats, and he would use a tennis ball, and he would bat it off the side of a building, off the side of a barn. I think that same barn I was telling you about with the liquor bottles, actually. But right there, that's how he practiced. Instead of hitting it with a tennis racket, he did this with a baseball bat. And that's basically how he developed that incredible eye that he had, because he was known for having a great batting eye. Didn't strike out much. He was a contact hitter with power. So this is Mize the young man. And I lived close to here, about 15 miles from there. Now let's get to the Babe Ruth connection here. Johnny is like second cousin to Claire Merritt Hodgson Ruth. So, and I guess Claire and the Babe got together in the 20s, right? They were a couple. And and so Johnny, and oh, the other connection, Johnny is a blood relative to Ty Cobb. So Mize happens to be related to two of the original Baseball Hall of Famers, which is just a weird sort of kind of thing. But this relationship was a much happier one than this relationship. Not that this was unhappy, he was just, I think, like a lot of people, a little bit afraid of Ty. You know, so Ty, he didn't acknowledge that relationship until he was probably a veteran in the major leagues, and Ty Cobb introduced himself. I hear we're cousins. And Ty, and Johnny was like, I had heard that, but I didn't want to acknowledge that publicly until you said something. Because he was kind of a shy, you know, and thought he was being respectful to the older Georgia Peach. But he always loved the Babe, and he called him Cousin George. He would visit him a lot in New York. When Johnny was with the Cardinals, he and his first wife would visit the Babe. And then when Johnny became a Giant, of course, he spent a lot more time with the Babe. Babe had died by the time he became a Yankee, and so. But that would have been interesting if Babe had survived to see Johnny playing for the Yankees. That would have been kind of cool. But the Babe loved Mize. He rooted for him to break his record. Mize gave serious chase one year to the Babe's 60 home run record, 47. And Babe was on record as saying, well, if somebody's got to break it, I hope we keep it in the family. You know, which he was thinking of his. And he also gifted Johnny like one of his bats and some other things that Johnny would swing, not in the game, but you know, at home in Demarest, sort of during the winter, he'd swing that thing and imagine that he was, you know, maybe Cousin George. But he always loved the Babe. I think that was a neat relationship. But this is young Mize in the minor leagues. He played for, like as I said, he was in the chain gang. He played for Greensboro, North Carolina, Elmira, and Rochester. So really only 3 minor league teams, which isn't so bad, but he went back and forth. So he was kind of like a pinball. Greensboro, and then Elmira, then back to Greensboro, then to Rochester, then to Greensboro, then back to... So he probably got, you know, a aching neck from going back and forth so much. But it was an interesting career. Every place he went in the minors he hit. He was well over 300, hit for power, a lot of line drives. He started out as an outfielder, and actually, though later in his career he was slow and lumbering and not much of a defensive, sometimes a defensive liability, earlier in his career he was lauded for his defense more than his hitting, which I found interesting. Some of the minor league reporters, for example, were talking about as good as he hits, he's an even better fielder, and they would talk about this gun that he had from right field. So apparently he had quite an arm when he was younger. But again, big guy, not super fast, had some speed because he did lead the league in triples once and finished in the top 5 a number of times. So as a young man, he had some speed. This I found to be, for me, this was the most interesting nugget that I found out about Johnny while researching this book. He spent a winter in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic playing baseball with and against some of the greatest Negro League stars who ever lived. And I found this fascinating because he's from this part of Georgia and the world that is, pardon the expression, very, very lily white. It's Appalachian, Georgia. He hadn't been out much, right? As a 19, 20-year-old, one of his colleagues on the Greensboro team said, hey, I've got an opportunity to play in the islands for the winter. We could do that, or, you know, we could go playing in upstate New York. And Mize was like, let's go to let's go to Puerto Rico. So this team of, they're wearing A's uniforms. They're actually from Richmond. And they're a collection of minor league players with a couple of major league players. It was a barnstorming unit. And Mize gets recruited. He goes down and he winds up playing with this team that's like the New York 27 Yankees of the Caribbean. It's a all-star team from Venezuela. And he plays for Martin Diego, if that name rings a bell, the great legend, El Immortal was his nickname. And he was basically the manager of the team. This fellow here, this is Totelo Vargas, who, believe it or not, now holds the record for the highest batting average in one season.
And had 116 at-bats.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I know. We could go around and around on that. But for what it is, he was a heck of a hitter. Whether that should count or not, this was a team that was like, okay, these guys can play. And they recruited this kid. So he plays, he does well, he hits home runs. The Latin press are talking about his beastly home runs, which I love that. You don't see that in a lot of American sports writing. And another thing that was interesting about this, the writer for some of these stories, byline, Ty Cobb. I mean, so there's a sense of humor with some of these guys, and this was in Santo Domingo, this was been in the Dominican Republic, Ty Cobb authoring these sports stories, which I thought was hilarious. But at any rate,
For real, or was?
there was some fake, some guy,
Oh,
some
okay.
Latin American sports writer who says, I'm gonna be Ty Cobb. And they would call them the blonde Americans, and he was by far, he was the guy they applauded the most. They thought Mize was, and he, again, keep in mind, he was like 20, he was still in the minor leagues. But he played, Josh Gibson was part of this group. There were a few Hall of Famers. Luis Aparicion's father was part of this group. It was a team of superstars, and I think it was an advanced class in how to play professional baseball for him. For a while there, he joined the Reds. While he was still in the minors, he was always on the chopping block because the Cardinals, that was one thing the Cardinals did very well. They built up this farm system, and they had a lot of talent that they could use to trade as well. And so Mize, again, was a known quantity from the time he was probably 18 and hitting 320 and 350. So they made a deal with the Reds. It was with a money-back guarantee because he had injured his leg as a young man playing for Rochester. Injured it pretty badly, worse than they thought. They found out later it was this rare condition of growths on his pelvis. These sharp, pointy growths that you would typically see in a cavalryman, a person who rides horses fast and hard, generally. Anyway, he developed this condition, but they gave him a shot, and he played spring training for the Reds, and he hit 400 for the Reds. He played against his cousin Babe Ruth for the only time in his life, because Babe's last season was with Boston at the time, and he was playing for the Braves, or the Bees, whatever they were called at the time, and he was playing first. The Babe was at first. So there's one picture I found of the two of them together where Babe is like reaching off of first base, like he had just gone past it, and Mize is reaching for the baseball. So there's one picture of them in action together that I've seen of the Babe and Johnny Mize, and it was during the spring training. But at the day before the season was to open, Larry McPhail, the general manager of the Reds, pulled the trigger and sent him back to the Cardinals. I mean, literally that day in the newspapers, people like Grantland Rice were saying, Mize is going to be one of the superstar rookies in 1935. It wouldn't have to wait till 36. The Reds sent him back to the Cardinals organization. He goes to Rochester, has another great year. He gets an operation that essentially saves his career. They ground down the growths on his pelvis. And in this Robert Hyland, who was they called him the Surgeon General of baseball. And he was based in St. Louis, but he used to work on a lot of players, and he's been credited with helping a lot of players' careers. I don't even think they paid him. I think he did this for the goodwill. Can you imagine this? So he saved Johnny's career. He makes his debut as a major leaguer, official major leaguer, not spring training, in 36, and he's an instant hit. He's hitting like nuts. He pushes Ripper Collins, their all-star first baseman. They trade him to the Cubs, and they decide we're going to keep this guy. And he becomes a fixture in St. Louis. He does, gets a lot of ads. He's on Wheaties boxes, tobacco, of course. He gets married to this really cute St. Louis gal. She's sort of from St. Louis royalty, if you will. Her dad is like an executive with Purina, or one of the top food companies, and they go to every Cardinals game. They have box seats, and so she knows baseball. And so you have like the prince and the princess of the city there for a while. And he's a big fan with the kids. One of his former teammates told me that he was always late after the game because the kids wanted autographs, and he signed every one of them. So he wouldn't leave. His buddy would wait to give him a ride. Johnny would sign every autograph, and the kids loved him. He was very friendly with the kids. Big, tough, gruff kind of guy. So that's him in the 30s. But the thing about Mize, he had a great sense of self-worth. He knew he was a commodity. He knew he was a great player. He held out like pretty much every year with the Cardinals. And Branch Rickey was notoriously cheap, and that's well known that the Cardinals, it's one reason they created the minor leagues, was to develop talent in an affordable way for them, right? So he couldn't bid for the high-priced lefty groves and this kind of thing. So they invented the farm system, and consequently, the Cardinals were one of the worst paid teams. So he held out every year. It got to the point where Rickey was like, you're not as good as you think you are. Really, he was. You looked at his numbers from 36 to 41, his years with the Cardinals. They're ridiculous. They're 330 lifetime average, on base well over 400. He was a superstar, but Rickey also liked to get rid of guys just before they hit their peak. He was known for being able to trade guys at the right time. He probably missed something with Mize, because he had some great years after that. So Mize gets sent to the New York Giants. A few days after Pearl Harbor, he gets sold to the New York Giants, and he becomes a hit there. I think he leads the league in home runs his first year with the Giants, or he's in the running. He's among the top home run hitters. In fact, the guy that he's battling is none other than his manager, Mel Ott, who is also a great home run hitter. He fits in at the Polo Grounds, which he wasn't used to. The Polo Grounds, if you might remember, was known for its ridiculously short porches in right field and left field. And he being a left-handed hitter, a 270-foot homer would be no trouble for him. But he was mainly a straightaway hitter. Mize, in his early years, was not known for being just a strict pull hitter. He could hit to all fields with power. And so he had to adjust himself. He was a scientist of hitting, and he even wrote a book about it later on. He really was one of those professor-type guys. He had more bats than anybody else. He would have a trunk of, he had 40, 45 bats, and other guys would have 3 or 4 each. He loved every bat. He weighed every one of them himself. He used them different times of the year, depending on the weather, depending on the pitcher. So a real scientist with the lumber. And but then after 1 year with the Giants, World War II is happening, and he's declared. First, he was not declared eligible because he was supporting his grandmother and his aunt, and his mom. His mom was working, but he was the sole supporter of these two women, and so he was not eligible for draft. And then in early '43, he became eligible for the draft, and he joins the Navy, and he spends the next 3 years hitting baseballs for Uncle Sam, not lugging a rifle, but a bat. As part of that was his contribution to the war effort. A lot of players were kind of thrust into baseball uniforms to provide entertainment, for the troops. And he, by all accounts, does it great. He does a great time in Chicago at the North Chicago Training Station, then in Hawaii, where they have certainly the best baseball in the world. In 1944 was happening in Hawaii. The players that were there are ridiculous. These are Hall of Famers. These are all-stars. And that was 44 was the year the Browns made it to the World Series, to give you a sense of why maybe it was a little bit of a down year. But if you looked at the rosters of these guys who were playing for the Army and the Navy teams, both DiMaggio's, for example, it was pretty ridiculous. And you also see he gained a little weight here too. Johnny Mize becomes truly the big cat. He puts on a ton of weight. He actually loses it again just before he gets back to play with the Giants, and he's probably in some of the best shape of his life. He comes back to New York, trim. He lost like 40 pounds. His last year of the war he spent on the island of Tinian, which I don't know if you're familiar with this. This is where the atomic bomb flights took off from to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He was stationed there doing basically as a physical education officer, instructor, building facilities, and frankly, working out to get in shape for the 1946 season because he'd gotten fat. And so he comes back in shape, and he has an incredible year. I mean, he comes back like he hadn't missed a day. But he's injured. This is where Mize's injuries really start to catch up with him. And even though he's only 33, this is the beginning of the end for him. But he has a couple of years that will never be matched. It's kind of insane what he does. In 1947, he hits 51 homers, and he strikes out only 42 times. Nobody's ever done this. Nobody's ever struck out less than 50 times and hit more than 50 homers. Nobody will ever do that again. He also, the next year, he hits 40 and strikes out 30-something times. This is a guy who could, his home runs and strikeouts, he did strike out more than he hit home runs in his career, but not by much. It's kind of insane. But Casey Stengel used to call him a home run hitter who hit like a singles hitter, hit like a leadoff hitter. And that's what he was known for. So he has these incredible years as a 30-something with the Giants, but he's obviously getting slower. The injuries are taking their toll by 49. And he gets unloaded to the Yankees. You know, Leo DeRocher is building a new team for the future. You know, this is pre-Willie Mays, but you can see the future coming. Speed is coming. Youth is coming. What's interesting, though, while he's on the Giants, Mize gets to play ball with Monty Irvin and Hank Thompson, the two first black players in the New York Giants. This would have been 1949. And I've gotten this question a lot about, you know, because Mize was there during the great, you know, transition from an all-white league to a truly, you know, national pastime with Jackie Robinson and so on. And have had people ask, he was a Southerner, what was he like during integration and so on and so forth. By all accounts, he was a real gentleman. His attitude was, can you play ball? That's all I care about. And I never wanted to make a case in the book either that he was a crusader for race. I think that would have been disingenuous. That would have been BSing it. He was still a man of his times, but he was far more, I would say, enlightened about those things than most of his colleagues. Having played ball, I think, in the Caribbean, that one winter really changed a lot for him. He was one of the only white guys on a team of mostly black people and Latino people. And so I think he learned from an early age, can you hit? That's really all I see. And on the ball field, that's all Johnny Mize saw. And so consequently, Monty Irvin wrote some glowing things about Johnny Mize later on, about what a gentleman he was. And but again, that doesn't mean that Johnny was like, come on, Jackie, take my job. Mize wanted to win. And if you were after his job, he was going to try. He actually almost did go to the Dodgers, too. That was another thing. When Jackie was brought up to the Dodgers as a first baseman, Mize was discussed. Even then, this was before the Gil Hodges story I mentioned to you earlier, Jeff. Mize was considered, they were going to bring him in to possibly back up Jackie Robinson. It didn't happen, and of course he stayed with the Giants and had that great years. When he becomes a Yankee, finishes his career on a high note, 5 straight World Series championships. He's a part-time player. This is one of the things that actually hurt his Hall of Fame. It's ironic. It hurt his Hall of Fame argument, if you will, because he spent 5 years as a part-time player, as a pinch hitter. His batting average had gone way down back at a time when sports writers and these other guys who looked at that, the batting average and all the statistics. His numbers were down because he was a pinch hitter. But if you looked at his pinch hitting numbers, they were pretty impressive. He was one of the best in the American League. Time after time, he was getting the big hit in a big game. The 1952 World Series alone, he becomes MVP of the World Series. He hits 3 home runs, helped them beat Brooklyn. So he was a role player on a team of many role players. It's what Casey Stengel was known for. He built this, and he was the first. I would say Mize was the first, and then you saw other guys later, Johnny Hopp, and who was the great pitcher? Blackwell, Johnny Sane, and I think part of the rule was you had to have the name Johnny or something for Stengel to consider you as a. But he built these amazing teams in this platoon system that won 5 straight World Series and like 10 out of 12 years, and Mize was a big part of that. Casey loved him. He was kind of like his hitting coach on the bench. He would piss off his teammates, though. Let me say that. He would piss off his teammates. He'd be, he's swinging at that shit in the dirt floor, you know, like that. And he'd come back, and they'd be upset. What do you know? But Casey liked that. He was like, good. And the interesting irony is the game that Carl Erskine set the strikeout record.
It's a great story.
Yes, and he's beaten down the Yankees. I think he struck out Mantle 4 times maybe, and he was striking out everybody at 14. His last one was Mize, who never struck out. And Mize had been criticizing, right, his teammates, what are you swinging at that crap in the dirt for? And Mize, you're up. And he gets up and he winds up striking out, swinging at crap in the dirt for being his 14th. And I don't think Mize laughed much about that, but Carl loved that. I mean, Carl Erskine loved that, I think. And because, you know, Carl Erskine, little guy, Johnny Mize, big guy. It was just the perfect David Goliath moment. And again, Mize could take it. He had enough successful days that he could take that one moment of ignominy. But here he is, and talking about his last year. He hangs it up after 20 years as a pro player. There's Ezra Charles feeling his muscle. This is the big hit in the, this is one of the World Series, one of his game-winning hits. And his lifetime numbers are ridiculous. 312 batting, 397 on base, 562 slugging. That's higher than Aaron, Mays. Man, that's higher than a lot of the guys that we revere. Hit 3 home runs in a game 6 times. He set that record, held it for many, many years. There's one player still playing who's tied him. In fact, you know who that is? Mookie Betts. So there's one guy left who has a chance to maybe beat this record. Sosa tied it too. So Sammy Sosa and Mookie Betts have tied Johnny with the 6 times with the 3 home runs. 10-time All-Star. And after he retired, you know, he was sort of drifting. I mean, because he wasn't a company guy. That was one thing I would say about one of the things about him, that he was sort of ahead of his time. He might have come across as a slow-talking Southerner type of guy. He wrote a book that was very well received. I'm sure it was an As Told To. The funny thing about the As Told To, I'll get to that. But he knew a lot about hitting, and I interviewed people like Bobby Brown, the former president of the American League, former Yankee third baseman, and he used to tell me about the trips on the train or the plane with Mize, and how you wanted to sit with him, especially if you were having a slump or having a hard time, because he always had great tips. He helped Bobby Brown become a great hitter, and others as well. But for some reason, he didn't get a lot of jobs in baseball. And I think a lot of it was because he was his own man. It was kind of like, his attitude was sort of like, I don't give a damn. It really was. That he actually said that to Leo DeRocher wanted to deal for him in 1941, before he went to the Giants. DeRocher called him. This was on the day Pearl Harbor was attacked. Johnny Mize is off in the Ozarks somewhere in the woods. He's out in the woods hunting birds, and there's a general store, one general store in like a 100 square mile area, and he happens to go there to pick up bullets or whatever the hell he's getting, and there's the guy at the store says, Leo DeRocher's calling you. It's the only phone within a day's walk or something. Leo DeRocher's calling you. You need to call him back. He calls him back, and Leo's like, Johnny, how'd you like to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers next year? Mize's response is, I don't give a damn where I play, as long as I play. And so I think DeRocher was like, all right, they didn't make the deal. He goes to the Giants a couple of days later anyway. I think DeRocher probably liked that attitude, frankly, but I don't think he had anybody's backing for that deal. So anyway, that's Mize, and his attitude didn't help him get jobs in baseball. Here's one of the few he had, is the Kansas City Athletics. He had 1 season with them as a hitting coach, because Hank Bauer was the manager, so he had a friend, hook him up, and so what happened? This was the question a lot of people had: what happened to Johnny Mize? He's all but forgotten. When he retired, you had sports writers who remembered him from his first 10, 11 years when he was like the best left-handed hitter in the National League. He's going to be on my Hall of Fame ballot next year. You'll see. But they changed the rules the next year. It became, instead of 1 year, 5-year wait. And then after, which is what we have today. You have to be retired 5 years. And then after the 5-year wait, the rules were changed again to where some of you might remember that they did inductions every other year. So inductions weren't every year, but every other year for about 15 years or so. So Mize sort of kept slipping through the cracks. He never got a lot of votes. I think he didn't make a lot of friends in the press box. Sometimes. There were a few who really dug him, but then there were a few that were scared of him, I think. So he just kind of retires. He becomes a liquor store owner, grows oranges in Florida. His first wife died. This is a weird Mize, Babe Ruth, more parallel weird crap. Johnny Mize's first wife dies in a fire, in a house fire. Shortly after that, he marries Marjorie. She was much younger than this. But Marjorie and Johnny were an item beforehand, similar to Babe and Claire, right? Babe and Claire had been a couple before before Helen Ruth died, but they weren't married. Well, Johnny and Marjorie were a couple before Johnny's first wife died, but they weren't married. So there's similarities there. Johnny and his first wife had sort of fallen apart, of course. But anyway, when they finally get married, at some point they moved back to Demorest, Georgia, and they become the popular old couple in town. The churches love having them at their dinners. People invite them over. And he gets the call from Cooperstown finally in 1981, 28 years later. And so a long time to wait when he had expected, well, it'll be any day now, any year now. That was what he was told. And he gets a little bitter during this time, the last few years, because sports writers are asking, why aren't you in the Hall of Fame? And I don't know. And he gets a little bitter about it. And so, but he finally gets in, and I do think it changes him. But the last years of his life, from 81 to 93, he's a little bit different guy. You know, he's more accessible. He's Johnny Mize Hall of Fame now. It's like a job, a profession. He's in demand. He's meeting presidents. He's meeting, you know, he's going all over the place now. It just sort of changed. And I think it was, I think that was what he always wanted, right? That Valhalla, baseball Valhalla. He thought he deserved it, and he finally got there. He becomes a reg, he gets a lot of fan mail. You know, he goes to things like the event at York that you mentioned. He goes to New York. He goes all over the place to different gatherings and events where he's invited. He's very accessible. He really is. And until he gets up, you know, his knees, the older he gets, it's a little harder for him to get around. But he does a lot of old-timer stuff. But on June 2nd, 93, he dies in his sleep. The last thing he did consciously in this life was watch a baseball game. He watched the Padres beat the Braves. I think it was 1-0 or 2-1. Smoltz lost a heartbreaker and went to sleep and then didn't wake up. But I mean, that's a pretty good way to go out. I think he, you know, that was one of the interesting things. Let's see, what was that? Go further.
Yeah, battery.
Oh, okay, there's a battery. Well, let's see. I have to close.
Oh, it's not plugged in?
Battery running low. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. So this is just some stuff around town. They built the Johnny Mize Athletic Center at Piedmont College then. Now it's called the University. In 2000, I was there for this. This was a neat home. Now there's trees all around this and stuff, so you can't see it from the road. There's the home. Let's see, we have, let's go, that'll get us there. Okay, this is inside the museum. You got a bunch of neat stuff in there, a lot of signed baseballs, uniforms, some cool art. The cover of my book is actually a painting that's in the Piedmont Library that a guy named Senator Ford, who was a radio personality. He was a vaudeville comedian first, then became this New York radio guy, and he was also an artist. He was a hell of an artist. He did some really neat work. Well, his painting is hanging in the Piedmont Library, and I just loved it. I used to see it all the time. I'd go there to research and whatever, and I knew I wanted that to be the cover of the book because, you know, he's with the Giants. It's the middle of his career. He's with the Giants, so it's, you know, it's kind of a neat time for him. And there's Jim Mize. And there's Judy Mize, and she's a big reason the book exists. She was a friend. I met her. I always knew who Johnny Mize was and all of this as a baseball fan, but happened to move into this town, this area. I was the editor of the local paper, and one of the first calls I get is from Judy Mize. Do you know who Johnny Mize was? Hell yeah, I know who he was. And we go through this whole thing, and after a while I said, do you mind if I do a book on your father? And I'd love it. He'd love it. And so it took me 20-something years from that moment to when I finally got done. And I wasn't working that whole time. I had to put the book down for about 20 years. My son was born with issues, and it's a whole long story. It's in the book, and it'll be in the movie. So I want to show you a quick clip of the movie and get back to that point I told you about the writer. Now this is it. Here's the painting in the library, and it's got all this interesting safe zone lit for you know, for non-traditional students, you might say, students in the LGBTQ community or whatever. And I think what they wanted to do here was have this neat juxtaposition of like, you know what, students, we want you to feel safe here. We want you to feel like this is a, you know, university you can be comfortable at, yada, yada. We welcome everybody, but we also have a lot of tradition. Baseball, there's some old artifacts here, so it's just kind of like this neat mix of stuff. Johnny Mize Drive, this is the current ball field, which they should name after him, but instead they wisely named it after the guy who wrote the check. Now this here, this is, if you know who Murray the K was? You ever heard of Murray the K? Murray the K was Johnny Mize's business manager. So this is the as told to in Johnny Mize's book, How to Hit, as told to Murray Kaufman, Murray the K. And so there's a great little less than 6 degrees of separation of Johnny Mize to the Beatles, which I never would have thought until I was researching the book. And this is yours truly at Mize in Unincorporated, which is where his family settled like in the 1830s. Ty Cobb Parkway will get you there, which is kind of a neat little thing. And I love, this was my favorite thing about that was written about the book. I mean, every author likes to get the feedback, and I don't think it's sold one extra book, but it comes from Jim Mize, his son, and he learned a lot about Johnny. Anyway, if I was concerned about anybody's thoughts about the book, if I had any stress at all, gee, I hope so-and-so, it was this guy. And so that was very gratifying that he was okay with it, because the reason that was important to me, I'm a journalist, so I mean, I'm not out to piss somebody off, but if that's what the story is, that's what the story is, right? They did not have a happy relationship. Johnny and his son were kind of, you know, like a lot of father-sons. And he told me the story. He was kind enough to share that. So I was a little concerned, like, is this too much? Is he going to be upset that I shared this? He was fine with it. And he's just a regular guy, you know, lives in Florida, where Johnny, you know, where he's from. And that's that. But I'll show you assuming the battery will hold out here. Let's see, how do I get back to the...
Hit the X.
Oh yeah, hit the X, and okay, here we go.
And then it should be on your main screen.
Okay, and then the movie,
Hit that X.
there we go. Now this is real, this will be real quick. But there's going to be a movie, a documentary based on the book that a filmmaker reached out, and anyway, this is just a short bit. This is like a 3-minute opener to the movie. It sounds like music from a baseball movie, but it's not. It's original music. Yeah, he hired some guy, and throughout the movie there's music. There's really cool renderings of Take Me Out to the Ball Game. There's jazz, there's a sad one. I think you'll hear some of them in this. Yeah, they have a drone. This is a ballpark. This is a mill field. There's an old mill village just outside of Denver called Habersham Mills, and people lived there for 100 years. It was a town basically. And they had this cool ball field. There's me and Harold throwing the ball, but this ball field is still there. Mize played there as a 15-year-old when he was getting $5 a game as a ringer.
We are joined by our guest this week, Jerry Grillo, who has an excellent biography of our topic this week. His name is Johnny Mize. He said,
Uh-oh.
That's okay. Well, it's more of that. I think the battery might have given up the ghost. There's more of that, and they get into a little bit about, well, a lot of the spiel that I gave you and a lot of stuff that I didn't give you. Because one of the things that Hal wants to do with the movies, I find myself the least interesting person in the world, but he put some things in there about the making of the book. It took a long time because, he got to meet my son and stuff, but it was an interesting journey. And he got to know more about the town and get to talk about how local heroes are important in these small towns. This is a small town, Demorest is. But I think that's what we have.
When is it coming out?
The movie should be out in the fall, but more widely in the spring, in time for opening day. But I think he's going to release something in the fall, and I want to say we might be doing something at Piedmont University, like in October, which, you know, that's where he kind of got his baseball start. But
And what source
yeah.
What source would it come from?
Okay, so it would be on, you know, he usually he gets it on Georgia Public Television, or he'll have it available for, you could purchase it or rent it or buy it. He'll do film festivals and this kind of thing. He does a lot of this stuff. He tends to work, he does work totally in the documentary field, and they mostly are like these 40, 45-minute things that you'll see on usually on your local public television thing. And so he's very Georgia-centric, like all of his stories he's done so far. There's been one about Florida, about bombing in Jacksonville. And that's why I was very gratified. It's like, geez, usually you're doing serious stuff, you know, about saving a river, or you know, you're doing baseball about my ridiculous book. But he's a storyteller, so I let you, it's like, tell your story, I'll help any way I can, and stay out of the way when you need me to. But he got lots of footage of a lot of stuff, and cool stuff around Demarest. Some cool old footage of Mize, that was just a little bit. And then there's I really urge you guys, if you're interested at all, to check out on YouTube Mize's Hall of Fame speech. It's priceless, because he, you know, he's just this gruff, good old boy, but he was sharp, and he wrote it all himself, and he's got some funny jokes in there. One of my favorites is, he's like, man, town I come from, Demarest, you had this much people in it, I believe it tilts. You know, I mean, he just comes up with this crazy stuff. And, you know, and it was a good timing too, because the baseball universe had just come out of its first extended strike in '81. And so the fans were a little upset. Boy, did they not know what was to come. Well, those fans in '81 had no idea. But they were really upset. So they were booing, but Bowie Kuhn, you know, was at the Hall of Fame, and they were like, and then Jack Buck was sort of the master of ceremonies, and isn't it great that we're going to have the All-Star game, and you know, because the All-Star game was late that year, and they booed him, they booed Jack Buck, because they're yelling, what about the fans? What about the fans? So when Mize got up there and they did the inductions, he kind of soothed the fans. He was like, one of the first things he said, I wanted to call out you fans. You know, if it wasn't for you guys, none of us would be here. Right away. So the guy I wouldn't say he was a Toastmaster, but he had some natural chops. And the more I got to learn about him, the more I loved that about him. You know, and that was a good thing about waiting 20-something years to finish this. When I started, I was glad I started when I did, because Whitey Ford was still alive, Bobby Brown was alive, Don Gutteridge was alive, Bill Werber, all these old ball players who knew Johnny Mize were still alive. And I had every intention of writing the book. And I got a publisher, a contract in the mail, a small publisher. I knew that Doubleday wasn't going to be beating down my door to do a Johnny Mize biography. So I reached out to McFarland. You might know they do a lot of baseball books. I said, hey. And to my surprise, they said, we would love to do a book on Johnny Mize. And so I had already accumulated things, and obviously I'd sent them a couple of, you know, sample chapters, because that's how they do it. And then I was ready to sink my teeth in and finish the rest of it. And my son was born 3 months premature. Changed my worldview and how to approach things. And I expected it would put it off for a year or two. I put it off for 20 years. And went on with my career, getting my family on its feet. Wrote another book in the meantime but I knew I'd come back to the Mize book, because I'd already started it, and I did not want to have wasted Whitey Ford's time. That's what it comes down to, really. Not just Whitey, but when I think about any of them, he's the first one that comes to mind. I'm thinking I did not want to have wasted these men who have died their time. But Whitey comes first to mind, because when I called him, you know, I'm an old fan, and I'm like, gosh, Whitey Ford, you know, the phone's ringing. He picks up the phone, and, hey, Whitey Ford, this is Jerry Grillo. How'd you get my number? He was very suspicious. Yeah, who's that guy? And then I told him who that guy was and where he got it from. Oh, a writer. All right. And he's like, first when he said writer, I thought, oh, he's gonna kill me now. But I guess he liked the writer who gave the guy the number, who gave me the number. So he was very cool. And then after, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes, he was telling good stories about how they teased Mize. But that was one of the joys of this, was meeting those older fellas all those years ago. And then since then, just learning all of the crap that I've learned since. Just amazing stuff that's available now, thanks to the databases of the 21st century that weren't available back when I started. And I think it's a much better book for having later. But any questions? I would love to answer anything. I'll make up answers. No, I got all the scoop.
So I have a sort of a specific question. It's fine if you don't know. My grandfather grew up and was a New York Giants fan, and he always said that there was some sort of chicanery involved as to how Mize was able to clear waivers and end up on the Yankees in 1949. Did you see anything about that? Because I guess the way it worked then was that you first had to clear your own whole league, and then you had to start with the last place team in the other league. And so my grandfather always says, how the hell was he able to clear waivers all the way up to the first place team in the other league?
Right. Yeah, that is a great. I didn't find anything that spoke to that. I found more that spoke to him being sort of a clubhouse pariah.
Okay.
In the sense that it's like, I don't know if we want him in the clubhouse. He's kind of a clubhouse lawyer. But that would track, because we're talking about a time before there was any oversight. There wasn't really any. That would completely track. The happy stories are the ones in which, Casey Stengel finds out from Frisch, at an all-star game that he says, hey, I hear Mize is going to be available, and Frisch says, then get him, whatever you can do, get him. And so that makes you think too that there's some things happening that, yeah. And I mean, the other thing was too, the money was good for its time, but it wasn't Lefty Grove good. Like, right? Didn't Lefty Grove get like what was it, like a ridiculous amount of money in 1925 to become an athletic? Mize went to the Yankees for like $40,000. So, yeah, there could have been, but he also was not. You look at how he was doing in '49. He had fallen off a lot. His home run production. They sold him in August, and by the time they sold him, all of his metrics were down. All the batting average, on base, power numbers, it was all down. So, but I also think that, to your point, it may have been a shenanigans that began the year before, because Leo DeRocher, when he started with the Giants in mid-48, would have been middle of the season 48, he knew he wanted to get rid of Mize, Willard, Marshall. So who knows? It could have been, and Leo is known to be able to pull some things off. Maybe not always the most scrupulous things.
Maybe some of the teams were afraid of us holding out like he did with French.
I wonder, because with the Giants, he didn't have as much of that issue. Like he wasn't doing, and the Giants, it was such a weird thing that war really screwed with a lot of careers, right? I mean, he played with the Giants 1 year and then 3 years of the war. I think by the time he came back, like he didn't hold out after 46, because he didn't hold out after 47. And so, yeah, I don't know how much of that was because he was happy with what Stoneman was offering him, or he just had mellowed, or what. And the money was, for him, was better. Was significantly better than what it had been for the Cardinals. But oh, that's a great point. Another thing I learned about Mize, it's not in the book, and I wish, and it kills me that it's not there. So when I do the second edition, that'll be there with the liquor bottles. He sued a baseball card company in 1940. That when they were using his likeness without paying him, and so he didn't want them to make a baseball card without getting something for it. And this would have been 1940, I think. 41 maybe, and it was a Boston baseball card company. There's a really terrific essay out there that this fellow wrote, who's with the, I want to say he's with the SABR chapter in Vermont, or it's a Vermont, Maine, isn't it? Who's the guy, who was the scout for Jackie Robinson again? The Dodgers scout.
Sukforth?
Sukforth. It's the Sukforth chapter. the Clyde Southforth chapter, there's a guy in that chapter who did a terrific essay on this episode with Mize and the baseball card company. But yeah, that's a great point. I'm gonna do some more research on that. I love that. This was your dad said that, your
My
uncle?
grandfather.
Your grandfather said that?
Grew up in the Bronx, but he was a New York Giants fan.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and he was spending what? He would have been 13 when Mize left the Giants
Oh my-
to go to the Yankees. So yeah.
Wow.
He was-
I met one guy on I think it was one of the SABR Zoom meeting that we did, who met his dad, I think it was, maybe ran like a haberdashery or something in the city that Mize used to go to get his clothes, and this guy met him there or something. So he was an older guy, but it was neat. It's like some old guy's like, yeah, I met him, he was one of my favorite players, you know. Yeah, no, any more questions or stuff? I want to learn. Yeah,
I have a whole bunch of questions, but I got here late.
that's all right, ask away.
I missed most of it. First, I remember as a kid, I grew up in Cleveland. It was either 1953 or 54. Mize was the pinch hitter.